This week, President Biden embarks on his first Middle East trip since taking office. His first stop is Israel. Well, he'll meet with Israeli and Palestinian leaders. Then he goes to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to visit the Crown Prince.
Well, the trip comes at a time of political instability in Israel and growing danger in the Middle East. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, Israelis want assurances the United States will stand with the Jewish state against internal and external threats.
President Biden is scheduled to land in Israel Wednesday for a two-day trip. Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren, sees Iran as a central issue for both the U.S. and Israel.
It's about calming us down on the Iran issue. I don't think the administration is very keen for us to take actual operations against Iran on a large scale.
Oren believes the U.S. wants to avoid a Mideast war, while Israel needs to know if America will have its back in case it has to go to war to stop Iran's nuclear program.
What will be America's position if Iran breaks out and creates a nuclear weapon? What will be America's position if Israel has to defend itself? Large-scale fighting does break out, not just with Israel and Iran, but Israel and Hezbollah, Israel and Hamas, Shiite militias in Iraq, the Houthi rebels in Yemen. What's America going to do? We often rely on the United States during these battles, both for ammunition and for diplomatic support, what I call the diplomatic Iron Dome.
President Biden is scheduled to meet Palestinians here at the Augusta Victoria Hospital in East Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives. It would mark the first time a U.S. president plans to visit East Jerusalem. And to many Israelis, it sends the wrong signal.
It signals that the United States still recognizes East Jerusalem as a future capital of the Palestinian state. And that is actually official American policy. It's not as if the Biden administration is inventing policy. That is their policy. The question is, do you want to accent that policy? You want to emphasize that policy in the middle of an electoral cycle in Israel?
On Friday, Biden is scheduled to meet with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Some Palestinians say the meeting will serve both leaders' political needs.
This visit for President Abbas would be a huge photo op to show the world, especially the Arab world and Palestinian street, that yes, here I am, I'm still alive and kicking. For Biden to show the midterm November electorals that yes, we take care of the world and we have issues to deal with and we are busy.
Good afternoon.
After his meeting with President Abbas, Biden heads to Saudi Arabia on the first official direct flight from Tel Aviv to the Desert Kingdom. Gordon?
Well, Chris, the Biden administration is advocating the two-state solution, which has been the American policy for decades. Given the current conditions on the ground, how realistic is a two-state solution?
Well, Gordon, it seems very unlikely right now. A recent Palestinian poll has shown that the terror group Hamas, believe it or not, is more popular than the Palestinian Authority. Nearly 80% of Palestinians, they want Mahmoud Abbas, the current president of the Palestinian Authority, to resign. And they want a Hamas feels like they're more deserving to represent the Palestinian people. But as you know, Gordon, the Hamas's charter is clear. It says it wants to eliminate Israel, kill Jews. So if a two-state solution was enacted right now, and the other state, that Palestinian state, would be ruled by an Islamist group dedicated to the destruction of Israel. And nearly 70% of the Palestinians are actually opposed, according to this poll, to a two-state solution. Yet this is still what the Biden administration is advocating. It reminds me, Gordon, of a speech your dad gave many years ago here in Herzliya, where he said this, quote, "land for peace is a cruel chimera."
Well, it's not new, and that's what amazes me, is that we don't seem to ever pay attention to what the Palestinians are actually saying. They have never advocated for a two-state solution. It's always been a one-state and no Jews allowed. That would drive them into the sea. What part of that, and why does and it's not just the United States, it's Europe, it's the UN. Why does the world governments not understand the reality on the ground?
It's kind of hard to believe, Gordon. It seems to be perhaps the media in many ways just doesn't report many of these polls. For example, often we've cited what's called the Palestinian Media Watch. and almost on a daily basis, Fatah, which is the political arm of the Palestinian Authority, they're asking for the destruction of Israel. They're saying that Israel should be replaced by a Palestinian state. They're calling for attacks against Jews. And so this is seldom reported or underreported. And so it seems like this continuing advocating of a two-state solution goes on with the United States, the European Union, many other countries, and it's propagated in the media as well.
Well, walk us through the changes the Biden administration has made towards the Palestinian. Under the Trump administration, consulates were closed. They were turned into the embassy for Israel. What are the changes that the Biden administration has made towards the Palestinians?
Well, one thing that's going to happen, perhaps when Biden comes here in a few days, Gordon, is he's going to give $100 million to some of the Palestinian hospitals in East Jerusalem that we were just at earlier today. He's given nearly $500 million to the PA. And what this does, Gordon, I know you understand this, what it does is allow the Palestinian Authority to use some of other funds to keep paying the families of convicted terrorists. Now, this may not violate what's called the Taylor Force Act, the letter of that law, but certainly the spirit, because that law forbids U.S. money to pay for those who have killed or injured Jews. One thing they've also done, they've restored funding to UNRWA. And as we've reported many times, this UN organization really teaches Palestinian children to believe that one day they will take over all of Israel. And as we mentioned, they've gone back to this two-state solution, something the Trump administration avoided. In fact, I talked to Jason Greenblatt a few weeks ago, and he said they really avoided even using the term. Instead, they had what's called the deal of the century, but the Palestinians refused that.
All right, well, let's look forward to the trip to Saudi Arabia. Do you expect that Saudi Arabia is actually going to recognize Israel? They're going to join the Abraham Accords? They'll normalize relations? Do you expect that is even possible?
Well, it could be one step on the way, Gordon, but it would seem unlikely that this would be the time or the place to really normalize relations. I think number one on the agenda right now is oil, so Joe Biden can come back and hopefully lower the high price of gas in the U.S. right now. Acting Prime Minister Yair Lapid did yesterday called for normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia he called the sake of our children. One thing also, an article came out on All Israel News. Our friend Joel Rosenberg says what Biden should do right now is invite Lapid with him when he goes to Saudi Arabia. Whether or not that would happen, that could move the needle, but we'll see if that materializes. Gordon, I think what's more likely is that President Biden will announce the establishment of some kind of regional security agreement. That would include Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other nations in the Abraham Accord, and all that is designed to blunt Iran's influence that's growing in the region.
I've heard a report it'll be the first time there's a direct flight from Israel to Saudi Arabia. Is that true? And if so, this is a very historic moment.
It is historic, and it is true officially. We were just talking about that before we went on the air. Actually, there was an unofficial and secret flight by Benjamin Netanyahu and then the head of the Mossad, Yossi Cohen, to a place called Neom. And they met apparently with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and also the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But it is the first official direct flight from Tel Aviv to Jeddah, which is right there on the Red Sea, where they're going to have a conference of many of these Islamic nations. So in a big sense, Joe Biden is making history in a few days.
All right. Well, Chris, thanks for the insight.